Now is the time for change. Doing business in the 21st century is made possible with Nkonki, external and internal audit assurance providers. Log on to nkonki.com to find out more.
The strategy of a company chosen by its directors determines its direction and its future. Our guests on the panel today will talk about the critical issues in business strategy. They are Nick Holland, Chief Executive of Goldfields, and experienced Non-Executive Director Colin Brayshaw. I'm Leah Roberts, and with me is Mervyn King. So, Mervyn, in recent years, the business model of a company has risen to fame. Before we talk about strategy, why the sudden interest in the business model?
Well, that was created in the IRC framework to show that the inputs, which we nominated as 6 capitals, which include the relationship between stakeholders, is your inputs. Your business model is really your business activities, which include functionally, operationally, governance, ERM, and your output. But your output also has an impact on the 3 aspects in the context in which a company operates. That's financially, socially, and environmentally. So the business model can be defined as how does the company make its money?
Yeah, and it just shows the circle actually and how you impact your capitals and they become your inputs. So Colin, how important is the business model to you?
Oh, I think very important. I mean, I think it really gives you a good insight into how business operates. And as Mervyn says, where it makes its money. And I think you're finding more and more reference in the media to people, looking at the business model to get an understanding of businesses.
So do you make sure that all the companies that you are director of have an accurate business model?
Yes.
Nick, business model?
Well, you can't operate without it. So, whether or not we include it in a report doesn't really impact the fact that if you want to run your business effectively, you've got to understand the environment you're operating in, you've got to understand the inputs that are necessary and the outputs you hope to get and how you mix them all together in the melting pot to produce that. So it's critical to actually forming the foundation of your whole strategy. So
did the integrated reporting framework, and we've been doing integrated reporting for about 4 years in this country, did that prompt you to actually define and write down your business model, or was it always there?
It was always there in the background, but it wasn't as well focused on as it could have been. So I think one of the benefits of formalized integrated reporting, it forces us into a clear discipline to make sure that we're asking ourselves the right questions. And in fact, one of the things we've learned over the last few years doing integrated reporting is we've actually come back and asked ourselves about our business and whether we've actually understood all of the inputs. So the fact that we're going through this formalization process as it is actually forcing us into thinking again. So there's real benefits flowing back into the business. And I didn't think that from the outset, but I do now.
And that's one of the things often said about integrated reporting, that it's forced companies to think about the business model. How does business model relate to strategy?
Well, strategy is also informed by your relationships with your stakeholders, because you learn about their reasonable needs, interests and expectations, which informs management. Management on a more informed basis develops strategy. The board should be informed. I believe there should be an agenda item at each board meeting, stakeholder relationships. So the board, right throughout the 12-month reporting cycle, is informed about these expectations. And so when management, senior management, proposes strategy to a board, the board on a more informed basis can interrogate that strategy before approving it and giving direction, and then management implementing, and also the oversight is more informed.
Yeah, and there's so much in that. We're going to go back to a number of those details. But could you say that the business model is the overall story and the strategy is, say, a 5-year picture on that story, Nick?
Yeah, I would say the business model is where we are at a point in time, and that helps us to formulate where we do want to be into the future, because we might look at the business model and say, there are elements in the business model we think that are going to have to change because the environment around us is changing, or we're changing, or we want to change. and that helps to inform a strategy. Now, for a mining company, we have to look way beyond 5 years, as you can imagine. It typically takes 5 to 10 years to discover new deposits and build them and bring them to production. So we do have to have a much longer time frame. So the business model, I would like to categorize it as a point in time where we are.
Nick? Sorry. Colin?
Yes, I mean, I think that if you have a look at the business model, and I think Nick's absolutely correct, it's always been in the background, but now it's very much in the forefront. I mean, I would think that we've seen an awful lot of companies in South Africa looking at expanding into Africa. And that is really expanding, you know, their total operations and looking at new territories, new markets. And that's all, I think, focused on what is going to be our business model going forward.
And the resilience of the business model.
Yeah.
So when company executives bring their proposed strategy and strategic objectives to you, how deeply, as a non-exec director, how deeply do you interrogate that?
Well, I think that, in my experience, most companies that are well run have a strategic session with management. The board has a strategic session with management once a year, and they set aside a fair amount of time. And they both go through, you know, how successful they've been in implementing the strategy up to date, and then spend more time looking at the future and how they should change, mend, and go about implementing their strategy.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, at least once a year, a board should spend quite a considerable time with management on the company strategy.
But it is a commonplace that the non-execs are strong enough. You have to be pretty strong to interrogate the executives who live in that business.
Well, the non-executive director doesn't have the cold-faced knowledge of the executive or the executive director, but he or she must ask what I call the intellectually naive question, you know, the uninformed question, but intelligent, and see what the answer is. But when I say see what the answer is, have a look also at the body language of the executive in answering it. That's been my experience.
That's a good tip.
And you need to interrogate it. But you know, management, in the nature of things, develop a jargon, and they speak in this jargon every day. And they've got short forms, they've got acronyms and everything. And so certainly, as chairman of companies, I've sent reports back and say rewrite it so it's understandable. And so you've got to understand it, and you must, you know, there's almost a natural inclination not to ask, excuse me, John, I don't understand, because I don't want Colin or Nick to think I'm stupid. You know, but you have to ask these questions.
But does that really happen in practice? I mean, are non-execs strong enough? But they don't have with respect, they don't have the technical knowledge in most instances.
No, but very often you can see potential risks when strategy is introduced. And that is a very important part a non-executive can play, is to really challenge whether you're not going into territory that you shouldn't be touching.
Do your non-execs give you a hard time, Nick?
Well, what we do with our non-execs is we take them along the road with us, and that way we avoid surprises and we avoid sharp changes in direction. That means it's critically important that you spend a lot of time with them explaining where you want to go and how you're going to get there, and do it on a regular basis. Now, what we do is every 2 years we'll have a detailed strategy review, but we'll have checkpoints that we circle back to every year to monitor progress against predefined action plans.
What is the ideal moment? How often should a board meet with its executives and review strategy?
Well, funny enough, I always say 2 years. I'm with Nick. But boards have changed completely. You know, the three of us are very experienced directors. And I went through an era, and so did Colin, that we spent a lot of time almost on management accounts, 80% of the board time on management accounts. Boards are not doing that anymore, because boards are starting to appreciate that they've got the long-term, the longevity of value creation is a critical issue. And you've got to think about all those inputs. You've got to think of the relationship with stakeholders. So this whole business model you've got to have sort of in your mind. and you've got to interrogate these things. So also the question is, when a board makes a decision, it's a unified board decision. It's one mind, because the board's decision is a collective. And I always think every 2 years you've got to make sure that your board is a unified collective mind. It's not a fragmented collective mind.
Yeah.
So you actually go through an exercise of, what are we trying to achieve? What are our value drivers? What are the key stakeholder groupings, and what are the expectations? We said last time that these are they, and what do you think, and are we meeting them? And now let's just look at our strategy, because your strategy can, as Nick says, you can have a 10-year strategy. I mean, I chaired a company, I was chairman and chief executive in those days of a company, where we had a 7-year strategy. But
it was a lot
trying to get to that strategy, along the way you've got to tweak it. You know, things happen that you've got to change it. But you're aiming for that goal at the end.
So,
I must admit, I might be in a minority one, but I still think that one should have a session once a year on strategy.
to keep things more in line.
And to both monitor that you're actually achieving your strategy, and to very often have to do a bit of tweaking, as Mervyn, has suggested, because things do change.
Yeah, 2 years, 1 year?
Well,
Why 2 years?
I think at every board meeting, the board has oversight as to how management is implementing the strategy. So you actually have that discussion I think what Colin is talking about is, do we need to tweak?
Yeah.
That's what you need to look at.
Yeah.
Now, whether you do that once a year or once every 2 years, it might be driven by what's happening.
Shouldn't that be at
Externalities might drive it, for example.
Is it too often to do it at every board meeting to consider, hey, are we still on the right track?
No, I think we have to form a long-term view. It needs to be based on a lot of empirical evidence that we can put together, and things don't change that quickly. Look, we are in a world that does change quicker than it used to. But for example, we know that one of the big challenges in mining is attitudes of communities in the different countries we operate in. That was an issue 3 years ago, and it's probably going to be an even bigger issue 2-3 years out. So the only question is, are we doing enough in relation to an issue that's already been identified? I think that's some of the tweaking that we're talking about.
Yeah, so it's pretty much continual tweaking, but as once a year or every 2 years. But again, looking to see if you're bringing in all the important factors. We're going to break now. Stay with us.
Nkonki has the professional capacity to deliver on your external and internal audit assurance requirements. Visit nkonki.com